"Sir, I can make your wife walk again," the boy said. His voice didn't shake, but the man in the tailored overcoat froze in the middle of the sidewalk. The wind swept through the parking lot of Denver's rehabilitation center, scattering dry leaves across the pavement. Mason Grant slowly turned his head. In his arms, Clara lay still, her slender frame wrapped in a thick wool blanket, but beneath it, she wore a soft silk dress the color of pale oceana shade of blue that shimmered as the light caught it. Her eyes were half closed as if she were trying to vanish into sleep or memory. She was still breathtaking. Even now 2 years after the accident, even after the weight loss, the pain, the silence carried a kind of grace that seemed untouched by time. Her cheekbones still curved like sculpture, her lips soft and pale against the chill. Mason loved her with a fierceness that surprised even him sometimes. She had been the fire in his otherwise calculated world, the dancer who made everything else feel slow. And now, she was all he fought for. The boy couldn't have been more than 9. He wore a worn jacket 3 sizes too big, duct tape wrapped around one of his sneakers, and a red beanie pulled down almost to his eyebrows. He sat cross-legged on a flattened cereal box beside the entryway, a beat-up sketch pad resting on his lap. Mason stared. "What did you just say?" The boy stood. He tucked the sketch pad under one arm, eyes calm. "I said I can help her walk again." Mason tightened his hold on Clara. Her fingers twitched at his collar as if to tell him it was okay, but her eyes never opened. He glanced around. No cameras, no press, just the hum of engines and the smell of stale hospital coffee drifting in the air. This had to be a joke, a cruel one. "I don't have time for this," Mason muttered and stepped toward the doors. "I don't want your money," the boy added. Mason stopped. That was new. Clara's voice rasped, soft and dry. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Mason said quickly. "Just a kid messing around." But the boy stepped forward again. "1 hour," he said. "That's all I ask. Let me try." Mason's jaw tightened. He was used to nonsense suits with fake charities, reporters pretending to be baristas, bloggers begging for sound bites. But this was different. The boy didn't look like he wanted attention. If anything, he looked like he'd rather disappear. Mason turned again, this time with purpose, and marched into the building. He didn't look back. But the boy's words lingered, following him through the elevator doors and down the pristine white hallways. That night, Mason sat alone in his study, the lights dimmed to a dull amber. Outside, snow dusted the treetops on Crestview Drive. He sipped from a glass of bourbon, untouched for an hour. On the nearby couch, Clara was curled beneath a heated blanket, the hem of her silk dress just visible near her ankles. The television glowed silent. Her legs, once the strength behind a decade of ballet performances at the Paramount Theater, now lay unmoving, pale under the blanket's edge. He watched her fingers dance over a photo in her lap, the 2 of them at the Grand Canyon, 10 years younger, sun in their faces. "You're staring," she said softly. Mason blinked. "Just thinking." "About that boy?" He hesitated. "How did you know?" "I wasn't asleep," she said. His voice, it reminded me of someone. Mason leaned forward. "You don't believe it, do you?" Clara smiled faintly. "Of course not, but he believed it. That's what I heard." Mason stood and paced toward the window. The boy had said it like it was truth, not desperation, like someone had shown him how, and he was just waiting for someone to listen. "You don't think I've tried everything?" he muttered. "I think you're tired," Clara whispered. He turned. "I am. Tired of hoping. Tired of false starts. Tired of seeing you hurt every time they tell us there's still no progress." She said nothing for a while. Then, "So what's 1 more hour?" Mason didn't respond. But the next morning, just after 10, he parked near a quiet corner of Harrington Park. He didn't tell Clara where they were going. He just wheeled her to the far side of the empty basketball court, under the shadow of a rusted oak tree, where the boy was already waiting, sketchpad beside him, a small towel folded neatly on the bench. The boy looked up, not surprised. He simply nodded once and said, "Thank you for coming." Mason didn't speak. Clara glanced between them, eyes narrowed. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jaden." "Okay, Jaden," she said, voice gentle. "Let's see what you've got." Mason crossed his arms. He was already regretting being here. But something in Clara's tone, something like hope wrapped in skepticism, held him in place. Jaden opened his bag and pulled out a warm cloth bundle that smelled faintly of cinnamon. Mason raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. 1 hour, Jaden repeated. That's all I need. Mason glanced down at Clara. She gave the faintest of nods. He exhaled. Then let's begin. Do you think Jaden can really do either? Is he just a playful kid with big dreams? If you believe in miracles, hit 1 in the comments. If you don't, press 2. Now, let's continue the story together. Jaden didn't hesitate. He knelt gently on the towel he had laid across the concrete and opened his small duffel bag. Inside were a pair of thick socks, a tennis ball, a folded hand towel, and a soft pouch filled with something warm and faintly scented like cinnamon and cloves. Mason watched closely, his jaw set, arms crossed like a man daring someone to prove him wrong. Clara sat quietly in the wheelchair, her silk dress flowing over her knees, the soft morning light catching the pale blue fabric. Her hair was pinned back loosely, and despite the cold, there was color in her cheeks. She studied Jaden with a gaze that was more curious than hopeful. This helps loosen the muscles, Jaden said, holding up the warm cloth pack. It's just rice. My mom used to heat it in a sock. He placed the pouch gently across Clara's thighs. She flinched. Hot. Too hot? He asked, instantly pulling back. She shook her head after a moment. Just haven't felt warmth there in a long time. Mason's shoulders tensed. Jaden gave a slow nod. That's good. It means your body's listening. He waited a few more seconds, then carefully began to rotate Clara's leg, small, measured movements, not forcing anything. His hands were steady, not the clumsy motions of a child, but the practiced, attentive touch of someone who knew when to stop, when to go slower, when to breathe. Clara blinked. You really learned this from your mom? Jaden nodded, eyes still focused. She worked at a shelter, helped folks who couldn't afford therapy. Veterans, mostly. I used to carry her bag. Mason raised an eyebrow. And she taught you this? She said the body doesn't always need machines. Sometimes it just needs someone not to give up. Mason didn't respond, but his grip on his elbow loosened. For the first time, he wasn't looking at Jaden like a problem. He was watching him work. Jaden continued speaking softly, mostly to Clara. He asked what shows she liked, what music she used to dance to, what food she missed the most. At first, her answers were clipped, but gradually, she opened up. I used to make lemon pasta, she murmured, with roasted shrimp. Mason tried to copy it once and set off the fire alarm. Jaden smiled. Sounds like something I'd do. Clara laughed, a small, surprised sound that made Mason's heart twist. Then came a moment. Jaden tapped lightly on her right knee. Do you feel that? Clara blinked slowly. I think so. Pressure. Not pain. Just a kind of push. Jaden looked up at Mason. That's good. Mason stepped forward. She sometimes says that in her sessions. Yeah, Jaden replied. But those sessions are in sterile rooms with wires and noise. This? He gestured around. This is just air, and sunlight, and someone trying without expecting anything. They continued for another 20 minutes. Jaden showed Clara how to flex her ankle gently, how to imagine sending signals from her hip down to her toes, like sending a letter through a long hallway. She tried. There was no movement, but she didn't look defeated. I'll show you again next week, Jaden said, packing his things. Your muscles still remember. We just have to help them speak up. Mason cleared his throat. We're not making promises. Jaden nodded. I'm not either. I'm just trying. He stood and backed away. Clara smiled at him, small, genuine. Mason watched her face, then glanced at the boy. Same time? Jaden's eyes lifted. If you'll be here, I will. Mason didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything. He simply wheeled Clara back to the car in silence. But in the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of Jaden sitting back down on the bench, sketchpad in hand, like nothing extraordinary had happened. That night, Clara sat by the window with her hands folded in her lap. She didn't say much during dinner. Mason watched her, uncertain. Finally, she said, I want to try again next week. He didn't respond right away. Then, all right. She turned to look at him. Do you think I'm crazy? No, he said quietly. I think Maybe we've both stopped believing anything could change. Clara gave him a faint smile. Then maybe that's what needs to change first. Mason didn't sleep well that night. Not because of worry, but because, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't entirely numb. Something had cracked open. Not faith, not hope, but possibility. And for a man like Mason Grant, that was already dangerous. The next Sunday morning was crisp, with a pale sun hanging low above the trees of Harrington Park. The basketball court was empty again, save for a few birds circling above the rusted hoops. Mason parked the SUV under the same sycamore near the curb. He didn't say anything as he got out. Clara was already dressed, her silk blue dress replaced by a long-sleeved cream blouse and soft gray slacks. Her hair was pulled back in a loose twist, and there was a calmness in her face that hadn't been there for months. Jaden was already there, seated on the bench beneath the oak tree, his duffel bag at his feet, the towel already laid out. He wore the same oversized coat, the same red beanie pulled down low. But this time, he stood when he saw them, a small smile appearing on his face like he'd been expecting them all along. "You came back," he said. Mason gave a tight nod. "We said we would." Clara smiled at him. "Good morning, Jaden." He nodded politely. "Morning, ma'am." They moved to the bench in silence. Mason helped Clara out of the car and into the wheelchair, wheeling her onto the towel with practiced gentleness. Jaden knelt again, his hands moving with quiet routine as he unpacked the same tools, the warm rice pack, the tennis ball, the towel, a small bottle of lotion. "This smells like lavender," Clara remarked as he opened the lid. "My mom used to say lavender calms the nerves," Jaden replied. "She said the body can't heal if the mind is panicking." He applied it gently to her knees, massaging in slow circles. Clara closed her eyes, not in pain, but in a kind of surrender. Mason stayed standing, arms crossed, but he was watching every movement. Jaden's voice stayed low, steady. He asked Clara about the music she used to dance to. She answered with pieces from Tchaikovsky and Ravel, memories spilling slowly like sunlight over an old photograph. Then Jaden changed the subject. "Do you ever imagine walking again?" Clara opened her eyes. "Every night. And every morning I remember I can't." Jaden looked down. "My mom used to say the body remembers, even when the world forgets." He placed his hands along her thighs and tapped her shin lightly. "Can you feel that?" Clara focused. "Not clearly. Like someone knocking on a door in another room." "Then let's open that door," he whispered. For the next 40 minutes, Jaden guided her through new stretches. This time he had her flex her toes, or try to. He encouraged her to picture her muscles responding like they once did. She tried, her brow furrowed with concentration, but no movement came. Jaden didn't flinch. Trying matters. Every signal you send is a message, even if it hasn't been delivered yet. Well, Mason shifted slightly, his posture easing without realizing it. At the end of the session, Jaden pressed her knee gently and asked, "Did you feel that?" Clara didn't answer right away. Then she said, "It felt like warmth. Not touch, but warmth." Jaden smiled. "That's a start." Mason stepped forward. "You ever think of doing this for a living?" Jaden shrugged. "I used to want to, when Mom was still around, but life went the way it went." He stood and began packing his things. Clara looked at Mason. "We're coming next Sunday." Mason nodded slowly, then turned to Jaden. "Do you have somewhere to go, after this?" Jaden's shoulders tensed. "I go around." "You live with someone?" Jaden paused, then muttered, "Sometimes." Clara's eyes softened. She didn't push, but when Jaden turned to leave, she called after him. "You remind me of someone I used to dance with," she said. "He wasn't the strongest, or the fastest, but he always knew when to catch me." Jaden turned back. He didn't smile, but his eyes met hers for a long second. "Then maybe I'm in the right place," he said. That night, Mason stood in the kitchen, drying a dish he'd already dried twice. Clara was in the living room, humming softly, something from Swan Lake. He watched her for a moment, the way she adjusted the cushion under her back, the way her fingers moved rhythmically to the music. "She smiled again today," he said aloud, though no one was there to hear. And then, after a moment of silence, he added, "So did I." The fourth Sunday came with a chill in the wind and gray clouds drifting low above the Denver skyline. Harrington Park looked quieter than usual. The swings creaked slightly in the breeze, and the basketball court was wet with last night's drizzle. Mason pulled up slowly in the SUV, glancing toward the bench under the oak tree. Jaden was there, as always, sitting with his duffel at his feet, his hands tucked into his sleeves. But something was different, looked smaller today. Not just in size, but in energy, as if the weight of the week had pressed him lower to the ground. Mason helped Clara out of the vehicle with practiced care. She wore a thick knit shawl over her shoulders and soft wool pants, her hands covered in leather gloves. As he wheeled her across the wet pavement, she whispered, "He doesn't look well." Mason nodded. "Neither do you." Clara gave him a small smile. "Then we're even." Jaden stood when they approached, brushing damp leaves off the towel he had laid out. "Sorry," he said. "I got here late. Had to warm the rice at the gas station microwave across the street." "No problem," Clara replied gently. "We're just glad you're here." They settled into their usual positions. Jaden knelt in front of her, his hands moving a little slower this time. The rice pack was warm but not hot, and Clara didn't flinch when it touched her legs. Mason remained standing nearby, arms folded, watching closely. Jaden began with the basic stretches. He didn't talk much at first. His hands worked silently, and even Clara seemed quieter than usual. Then Clara asked softly, "Are you okay?" Jaden paused. "Yeah, just tired." Mason squinted. "You sure about that?" Jaden gave a slight nod. "Sometimes being tired is just part of the job." Clara looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and gently touched his shoulder. "You're allowed to rest too." He didn't answer, but the way his shoulders lifted just slightly said he heard her. They continued the session. Clara's feet didn't move, but her awareness was sharper. When Jaden tapped her heel, she responded immediately. "Felt it." "Where?" he asked. "Right where it should be." Jaden smiled. "That's good." Then came something new. Jaden pulled out a rubber band long and flattened, handed one end to Mason. "Put this around her foot, gently. We'll try resistance today." Mason hesitated. "I'm not trained." Jaden looked up. "You're her husband." Mason blinked, then crouched beside Clara, and did as instructed. Together, they worked through a series of small motion ankle presses, knee lifts, toe curls. Most didn't result in visible movement, but the effort was there, and Jaden responded to each one like it mattered. After 30 minutes, Clara was sweating lightly. Her cheeks were flushed, and her breathing was a little faster. "I'm okay," she said when Mason offered to stop. "Let's finish." Jaden looked proud, not loud about it, just quietly proud, the way someone is when they see someone else doing something hard and refusing to quit. As they wrapped up, Mason handed Jaden a small paper bag. Inside was a sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. "You didn't have to," Jaden said. "I know," Mason replied, "but I wanted to." Jaden nodded once, tucked the bag beside his duffel, and stood. He looked like he was about to say goodbye when Clara spoke again. "Jaden," she said, "what happened to your mom?" His body stiffened for half a second. Then he exhaled. "She got sick. Real fast. There wasn't insurance. Just me. She passed last winter." "I'm so sorry," Clara whispered. He gave a small shrug. "She taught me what I needed to know." Mason's voice was quiet. "And what's that?" Jaden glanced between them. "That healing doesn't always start in hospitals." That evening, back at home, Mason sat by the fireplace, flipping through an old photo album. Clara wheeled herself beside him, her hands still trembling slightly from the exertion. She looked down at one of the photos, her in mid-air during a stage leap, muscles arched, eyes wild with joy. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "Do you think I'll dance again?" Mason didn't answer right away. He reached over and took her hand. "I think if there's even a 1% chance, it's worth fighting for." Clara smiled through wet lashes. "Then we keep fighting." Outside, the wind shook the branches, but inside their house, something was growing quiet, stubborn, and warm, like hope learning how to walk. The 5th Sunday arrived under a heavy gray sky, and the air carried the weight of something unspoken. Mason knew it the moment Clara refused breakfast. She didn't say anything as he brewed coffee, didn't look up when he placed a blanket over her knees in the passenger seat. Her hands were still, too still, At Harrington Park, Jaden was already there, sitting quietly beneath the oak tree. His sketch pad was open, but he wasn't drawing, just staring down at a half-finished page. When Mason opened the car door, Clara didn't move. "I don't want to," she said flatly. Mason looked at her, unsure if he'd heard right. "I don't want to go out there," she repeated. Her voice wasn't angry, it was defeated. Mason walked around to her side of the car. "What happened?" Clara stared at the dashboard. "I tried this morning. Before you woke up, I focused. I imagined the movement. I tried so hard, and nothing." Jaden had already started walking toward them, towel in hand. When he reached the car, he slowed. "Is everything all right?" he asked gently. "She's not feeling it today," Mason replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. Clara still didn't look up. "I'm tired of trying," she murmured. Jaden stood still for a moment, then crouched beside her door, lowering his voice. "You think I never get tired?" Clara's head turned slightly. "You think I never sat in a shelter and watched my mom cry because we couldn't afford her medicine? You think I didn't scream when I found her one morning and she couldn't open her eyes?" Mason's throat tightened. Clara looked directly at Jaden now. "I get tired too," Jaden said softly. "I get angry. I get scared. But if I stop trying, then the part of me that still believes in her, that part dies too." Clara blinked, her expression trembling. "I'm scared." Mason inhaled sharply. It was the first time she'd said it aloud. Jaden nodded. "Me too. But scared doesn't mean stop. Scared means we're close to something that matters." Silence lingered between them. Then Clara whispered, "Okay." Jaden stepped back as Mason helped lift her from the seat and into the wheelchair. No one spoke during the short roll to the bench. The usual tools were already out. This time, Jaden worked slower. There was no rush in his movements, just presence. The session wasn't as technical. Jaden didn't push for stretches or range. He just held her feet, asked her to breathe, to focus on sensation, on the weight of her own limbs. After 20 minutes, he pressed lightly on her right ankle. "Tell me what you feel." Clara's face tightened with concentration. "It's faint. But, yes, there's something." Jaden nodded. "That's your body remembering." Then it happened. Small, quiet, but real. Clara's right foot just the toe twitched. Mason leaned forward, blinking. "Was that, Clara gasped. "Did you see that?" Jaden didn't react with surprise. He just smiled, soft and certain. "You did it." Clara covered her mouth with both hands. Tears welled in her eyes, and Mason knelt down beside her, one hand gripping the armrest of her chair. "Do it again," he said. Clara focused. Her foot didn't move this time, but she was smiling, trembling with emotion. "It was real," she whispered. "It happened." Jaden nodded. "And it'll happen again." Mason didn't speak. He just looked at the boy for a long time. Something inside him was shifting, something old, something heavy. That night, Mason stood on the back porch, the cool wind brushing against his sleeves. Inside, Clara was on the phone with her sister, retelling the moment, laughing through tears. He watched her through the kitchen window and didn't blink. Jaden had given them more than a twitch of a toe. He'd given them something they thought was gone for good. Tomorrow, Mason decided, he'd make a call. He didn't know where Jaden slept at night, or if he had food every morning, but he was done watching that boy disappear into shadows. Some bridges weren't meant to be observed from a distance. Some, you walked across together. Mason opened the front door just after sunrise the next morning, coffee mug in hand, still wearing the same flannel pajama pants from the night before. He wasn't sure what he expected, but there he was. Jaden stood at the edge of the driveway, a worn backpack slung over one shoulder, a rolled-up blanket under one arm. His red beanie was pulled low, and his sneakers, still wrapped in duct tape, looked even more battered in the early light. "Right on time," Mason said. Jaden didn't smile. "You said if I needed a place." "I meant it," Mason replied, stepping aside. "Come in." The boy hesitated only a moment before walking through the doorway. Inside, the house was warm, quiet. Clara was still asleep upstairs. The scent of cinnamon and brewed coffee filled the air. Mason showed him the guest room, a small space near the back with a soft bed, clean sheets, and a desk by the window. Jaden dropped his things gently, as if afraid to disturb the quiet. "You can stay as long as you need," Mason said. "No questions, no pressure." Yaden nodded. Thanks. Later that morning, Clara wheeled herself into the kitchen, her eyes widening when she saw the boy seated at the table, sketching quietly with a cup of orange juice nearby. Jaden? He looked up. Good morning, ma'am. Her smile was full and instant. So you're the house guest I heard moving around. He shrugged shyly. Didn't want to be loud. Clara wheeled herself to the table and reached across to touch his hand gently. You're not loud. You're exactly what this house needed. That afternoon they returned to Harrington Park not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Mason carried Clara's chair from the SUV while Jaden rolled out the towel on the usual spot near the oak tree. A few joggers passed by, and one woman walking her dog smiled at them. The place didn't feel cold anymore. It felt lived in, claimed. Ready? Jaden asked. Clara nodded. Let's keep going. Today, they worked on toe curls again, then ankle rolls. Jaden added a small weighted beanbag to her foot, instructing her to lift against it. She couldn't lift it yet, but she could feel it there, feel the challenge. Mason joined in, seated cross-legged on the grass, mirroring some of the movements Jaden demonstrated. You're bending the wrong way, Jaden said with a straight face. Mason gave him a side glance. Haven't stretched since Clinton was president. Clara laughed, her voice light and musical. Jaden smiled too. Then, about 20 minutes in, Jaden pulled out a soft cloth belt from his bag. I want to try something different, he said. We'll help her lift both knees. Mason blinked. You think she's ready for that? Jaden nodded. She's been ready. They positioned Clara carefully belt looped under her knees, Mason holding one end, Jaden the other. Clara closed her eyes, concentrated, breathed slowly. Now, Jaden whispered. She grunted softly. Her knees trembled. Then slowly they lifted. Only an inch, maybe less, but they lifted. Mason stared. You did that? Clara's voice was shaky. I did that. Jaden kept his gaze on the belt. Told you, the body remembers. Clara leaned back in her chair, exhausted, glowing. Mason reached for her hand and held it tight. After the session, Jaden sat on the bench alone, sketching again. Mason approached and sat beside him. Where did you sleep before? Mason asked. Jaden hesitated. Shelter sometimes. An old bus depot. A laundry room once. Mason exhaled through his nose. You've been through more than any kid should. Jaden shrugged. I had Mom. She made the hard stuff feel less hard. Mason looked at him for a long moment. You ever think about going back to school? Jaden didn't answer right away. Sometimes. I don't know if I'm good at school stuff. You're good at people, Mason said. And that's rarer. Jaden nodded slowly. I want to help people walk again, like Mom did. Mason gave a slight smile. Then we'll figure out how to get you there. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. From the bench, they could see Clara practicing gentle toe taps on the towel, her face set in quiet determination. Something was building slow but steady, not just movement, not just strength, but a family. And none of them dared say it aloud yet, but all three of them knew. They were no longer fighting alone. Chat GPT Danoi. The following Sunday arrived with a strange kind of stillness in the air. Harrington Park was quieter than usual, almost like it was holding its breath. Jaden felt it the moment he unzipped his bag and laid out the towel. He had his rice pack warmed, his tools ready, and a spare set of resistance bands folded neatly beside the bench. But something tugged at his chest, a pressure he couldn't name. The SUV rolled in late, later than usual. Jaden stood up, alert. Mason got out quickly and moved around to the passenger side. Clara didn't open the door. Jaden walked over just as Mason helped her into the chair. She wasn't smiling. Her face was pale, her shoulders tight, her lips pressed into a thin line. She doesn't want to do it today, Mason said sharply. Just go easy. Jaden's expression didn't change. He knelt beside Clara anyway. What happened? Clara crossed her arms, her gaze locked on the cracked pavement. I tried again this morning. I woke up early, warmed my legs, did everything right, and nothing happened. Not a twitch, not a feeling, nothing. Her voice cracked at the end, brittle with frustration. I'm tired of lying to myself. Mason turned away, jaw tight. Jaden didn't move. You think you're lying? I've been chasing shadows, she snapped, pretending that one toe wiggle means I'm on my way back to the stage. It does mean that, Jaden said, calm as ever. No, Jaden. It means my nervous system fired once. By accident. I'm still in this chair. Jaden sat back on his heels. You're allowed to be mad. I get mad too. Sometimes I'd yell into a pillow so loud my throat would burn. But I didn't stop. Because stopping is when it really ends. Clara's eyes glistened. I'm scared. I'm scared that this is as far as I'll ever get. Mason turned around at that, his expression softening. It was the first time he'd heard her say it that plainly. Jaden leaned forward. Scared doesn't mean stop. It means you're close. Closer than ever. She didn't respond right away. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, then help me try again. That was all he needed. They began simply gentle massage, warming her knees, stretching each leg slowly. Jaden didn't speak much. Neither did Clara. But Mason stayed close, kneeling when needed, lifting when asked, his hands steadier than usual. 30 minutes passed. Then, as Jaden tapped her right ankle and gave the familiar cue, Clara inhaled deeply, focused, and her right foot moved. Not a twitch. Not a wiggle. A slide. It scraped slowly against the towel. Maybe an inch. Maybe 2. Jaden sat back. You did it. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God! Mason dropped to his knees. Do it again. And she did. Slower this time, but with more control. Her eyes were wide, shining. Her voice trembled. I moved it. Jaden didn't say anything. He just sat back and let her feel it fully, completely. Mason put both hands on her legs, his head bowed for a moment. When he looked up, his voice cracked. We're not chasing shadows anymore. Clara laughed through tears. I needed that. Jaden finally smiled. That's what I'm here for. That night, the house didn't feel like a quiet recovery room anymore. Clara played her old records. Mason cooked pasta and actually didn't burn anything. Jaden sat at the kitchen table sketching again, this time drawing feet in motion-own frame after another, the heel lifting, the toes pointing. Later, as Mason washed the dishes, he called over his shoulder. Jaden, yeah? You ever think about dancing? Jaden paused. I've never danced in my life. Mason smirked. That might change soon. Jaden tilted his head. Why? Mason glanced toward the living room where Clara was stretching gently, humming to herself. Because she's going to need a partner someday. Jaden smiled softly and went back to drawing. In that moment, he didn't feel like a visitor, or a helper, or a boy on the edge of a world that didn't see him. He felt like he belonged. By the 8th Sunday, word had started to spread. It wasn't intentional. Clara hadn't posted anything. Mason certainly hadn't told anyone. But someone, maybe the jogger who passed by last week, or the nurse walking her dog near the park had, noticed the woman in the wheelchair lifting her foot, and they had told someone else. That Sunday, when Mason pulled up to Harrington Park, there were 2 unfamiliar families sitting on a bench nearby. One had a boy in a walker. The other, a girl recovering from a stroke, her hand curled softly against her chest. Jaden noticed them immediately. He looked at Mason, uncertain. They're not here for a show, Mason said quietly. They're here because they've heard what you can do. Jaden swallowed hard and nodded. Clara looked toward the other kids, then at Jaden. You can help them. Jaden hesitated. What about your session? Clara smiled. We've had 7 weeks. Let's give them one. Jaden looked over at the girl. She was maybe 9, dark curls and large eyes filled with nervous energy. He walked to her first, knelt down, introduced himself, asked her name Sierra, asked her what she missed most jumping rope. Her father watched with tight shoulders, holding a thermos and trying to act casual. Jaden used the same towel method, the same warm rice pack, the same gentle tone. He showed Sierra's mom how to massage behind the girl's knee, how to test for reflex with the tennis ball. Then he moved to the boy with the walker Ben, taught his parents how to use light band resistance, how to talk to him without talking down. Meanwhile, Clara watched everything from her chair, arms folded, proud and quiet. Mason stood behind her, hands in his pockets. They believe him, she said. He believes in them first, Mason replied. When Jaden finished, he returned to Clara. Sorry for missing your session. She shook her head. Jaden, you didn't miss anything. You multiplied it. He looked down. They needed it. You gave them something their doctors couldn't, she said. Hope that didn't come in a brochure. And Jaden didn't respond. But Mason saw it, the shift in his shoulders, the lift in his posture. He was stepping into something bigger than he had imagined. That evening, back at the house, Clara was on the back deck, watching the last of the autumn leaves fall. Jaden sat at the table inside, flipping through a worn community guidebook Mason had left out for him, highlighted sections on GED programs, vocational courses, health certifications. Are you serious about this? Jaden asked. Mason looked up from the stove. About helping you find a path? Yeah, dead serious. Jaden ran his fingers over the page. It's been a long time since I thought school was for me. Maybe it wasn't then, Mason said, but it is now. Jaden looked up. You think I could really become, I don't know, someone who helps people for a living? You already are, Mason said. We're just giving the world a way to see it. Just then, Clara wheeled into the room. You want to see something? They both looked up. She didn't say anything. She just parked beside the kitchen counter, braced her hands against the edge, and pushed up. Mason rushed forward instinctively, but she waved him off. I've got it, she whispered. Her legs shook. Her arms trembled. But she stood. Jaden's eyes widened. And then slow, controlled, she took one step forward. One step, then collapsed into Mason's arms, laughing, crying all at once. Jaden stood frozen, then took a shaky step toward her. Clara reached out, grabbed his hand, and squeezed it tight. You said we'd get here, she whispered. Jaden shook his head. You got here. That night, no one talked about therapy. No one talked about recovery. They ate pasta, burned the garlic bread, and turned the music too loud. Clara danced from her chair, spinning slowly with her arms raised. Mason took a picture. Jaden didn't dance, but he smiled, big and real, and that was enough. For now, it had been 9 Sundays. 9 Sundays of rice packs, of soft commands and trembling muscles, of tears that meant frustration, and others that meant triumph. 9 Sundays since a boy with duct tape sneakers had stepped out of the shadows and quietly turned a family's life upside down. But this Sunday was different. Jaden felt it before the SUV even pulled in. The air was still. The light had a golden weight to it, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Families had already gathered near the oak tree. 5 now, kids in braces, parents with folding chairs. A local pastor had even brought a box of bagels and hot chocolate. When Mason and Clara arrived, Jaden noticed something strange. Clara was sitting taller in her chair. She wasn't bundled up like she had been in weeks prior. She wore a fitted navy blouse, dark jeans, and ankle boots. No blanket, no gloves, and there was a quiet determination in her eyes. She gave Jaden a look, calm, steady. You ready? He asked. She nodded. I think we all are. Mason wheeled her to the center of the mat. Jaden knelt in front of her like he always did, hands gentle, voice low. Same as before, he said. We help you stand. You do the rest. Mason moved behind her, placed his hands gently beneath her arms. Jaden positioned her knees, guiding them carefully into place. Clara inhaled, deeply, closed her eyes. Okay, Jaden whispered. On 3. She nodded. 1, 2, 3. Mason lifted. Jaden steadied. And Clara, she stood. There was a tremble. Yes. A tight shake in her thighs. A quiver in her arms. But she was up, on her own 2 feet. The crowd quieted. Not a whisper, not a rustle, just the sound of the breeze brushing through the oak leaves above. Clara opened her eyes. I'm standing, she whispered. Jaden blinked hard. Yeah, you are. Ugh. Mason froze for a second like he couldn't breathe. Then he slowly let go. Clara stayed up. Mason stepped back, hands hovering. She didn't fall. Jaden stepped away, just a bit. You've got this. Then Clara took a step, and another. And because she was Clara, graceful, fearless, relentless, she took a third. The third step faltered. Her knees buckled, and she stumbled forward right into Mason's arms. He caught her instantly, his hands shaking as he held her, forehead pressed against hers. You did it, he whispered. You really did it. Clara laughed and cried at once. We did it. Give little Jaden a like, won't you? for never giving upon her, or on himself. Jaden stood a few feet away, unmoving, just watching. His hands were clenched at his sides, but not from fear, from awe. Clara turned to him. "You said we'd try. That was all you ever promised." Jaden gave her a small grin. "Trying's what gets you there." No one left the park quickly that afternoon. People lingered. They talked. Some hugged. Some cried. A few prayed. Jaden sat on the bench, his sketchpad untouched beside him. He didn't speak much. He never did. Later that night, Mason stood in the kitchen drying dishes while Jaden poured cereal into a bowl late-night comfort food. Clara sat nearby, her legs stretched, a pillow beneath her ankles. "You know you changed everything," Mason said, not turning around. Jaden didn't answer. Mason walked over and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "My wife walked today. Not because of some machine, not because of a hospital or a miracle drug. She walked because a kid with nothing kept showing up." Jaden looked up slowly. "That's what my mom would have done." Mason's throat tightened. "I wish she could have seen this." Jaden smiled faintly. "She did. I think she sees everything." Mason nodded, then softly, "Jaden, you're going to change a lot of lives." Jaden stirred his cereal. "I already am." He wasn't being arrogant. He wasn't joking. He was simply telling the truth, and Mason knew it. Some people never ask for recognition. They don't wear capes. They don't chase headlines. They just show up again and again until the world around them begins to shift. Until hope, once forgotten, becomes possible again. And sometimes, they come wearing a red beanie and shoes held together by tape. But what they carry is more powerful than anything a doctor can prescribe. It's belief, and the quiet, stubborn love that comes with never giving up.